Let's do it.
Joe, welcome to the show. I'm looking forward to having this chat.
Yeah, thanks for having me, John. Appreciate it. I'm a long time listener, so it's exciting to be on.
Well, why don't we start with you just introducing yourself to everybody, and then we'll see where that naturally takes us.
Sure. My name is Joe Martin. I'm a singer-songwriter, a struggling musician. I've been paying my dues for pretty much the past decade. And I've been touring the UK, and occasionally I get over to the States, over to Nashville, but I've not been in a while. But yeah, I've just been singing and writing songs for the past several years, and I'm finally putting out my debut album in a few weeks' time, which is really exciting and nerve-wracking. But yeah, I picked up a guitar sort of early teens. Well, I started doing music from like the age of 5 or 6. Picked up guitar early teens, sort of taught myself to play. Always knew I wanted to write songs, but kind of didn't really have enough life experience to write anything worth listening to, I guess. And then sort of at the age of like 18, 19, started writing, fell in love with country music, funnily enough. There's not much country music over here in the UK, but I just love like the storytelling aspect of it. And, you know, I really sort of like fell in love with the genre. Been over to Nashville a few times over the past few years. And yeah, so I'm about to put out this debut album. I'm sure we'll get into Bitcoin side of stuff later, but that's kind of the music side of things.
What was it that inspired you, or you said you kind of knew you wanted to be a musician? It doesn't matter really what you end up doing. I mean, a lot of people don't have that type of clarity when they're younger, whether they want to go on to be anything in particular or specific. What was it that, you know, gave you that degree of clarity or confidence that you wanted to pursue a career in music at such a young age?
I don't know. I just gravitated to it. And I was just always playing, and you know, I was kind of on stage from like the age of 5 or 6. So like it never really sort of
Did you grow up in a musical family?
yeah, well, my dad was in entertainment. My dad was a comedian, actually.
Really?
And he had a career in comedy. So it's like, yeah, there's overlaps there, but it is a different beast, you know, the sort of like comedy stuff from the music industry. But I have very supportive parents. They sort of like nudged me along that path from an early age because I showed an interest in it. And then I kind of like found my own way later on with the songwriting stuff. And I'd always be listening to like songwriters like James Taylor, Simon Garfunkel, Bob Dylan, like all the old school stuff. I definitely didn't have sort of a typical, you know, playlist when I was younger, like listening to stuff that my peers were listening to. I was listening to like, you know, older stuff.
Right.
So that's what's kind of like, you know, influenced me and informed my songwriting as well. And then the sort of Americana country stuff came a bit later on. I was doing a lot of folk stuff earlier on. And then, you know, I didn't really give a thought to like sort of American music, American country music until I was sort of like late teens. And I discovered this TV show called Nashville. I don't know if you ever watched that.
No.
A lot of UK artists that do country, they cite that show a lot as being an influence, but that was shown over here, and I kind of got exposed to that kind of music, and then started listening to more contemporary country artists, and sort of just like was like, yeah, this is it. This is what I want to do. And it was all very story based and lyric based, and that's what I love about songwriting. So it was like a natural fit for me. So yeah, that's what led me to it.
It's funny you bring up Dylan. So growing up, like as a teenager, I guess I listened to some of the like contemporary stuff, rap, like, you know, Eminem and stuff was popular when I was a teenager, and I listened to some of that. I listened to some like 80s rock, like Guns N' Roses and all that kind of jazz. So I had fairly eclectic taste. And I like a Rolling Stone would be on, you know, random playlists and stuff, because that's kind of like, you know, obviously one of the all-time classics. But I never really got Bob Dylan. I just kind of knew some of the songs, and I thought they were good. And then I remember one morning I was hungover as shit and I ordered like a ton of, I was probably 20, 21. I ordered a ton of food, you know, like chicken wings and ice cream. And it's from all my favorite because, you know, I was just so hungover. I needed the comfort pizza.
Yeah.
And just by chance, I turned on the TV and on PBS or whatever, like the public broadcaster, they were airing the Bob Dylan at the Newport Folk Festival in 1963, 4, and 5. I don't know if
Yeah.
you've seen it, but it's all in black and white.
Yeah.
And it's
Yeah.
so fascinating because there's no commentary or anything. It's literally just his performances, all of his performances in 63, and then the next ones are in 64 and the next in 65. And you get to see, because that was the period where, you know, Dylan had, I mean, I guess he's evolved a lot over the course of career, but this was like the most, it made a lot of fuss, you know, that he kind of went from being a hardcore folk singer, you know, just with his acoustic guitar and his harmonica, to in 65 he plugged in at the Newport Folk Festival, and it was a
Yeah.
whole big thing. You know, this is when Bitcoin Dylan went electric, right? And a lot of people were unhappy about it. And you know, in 1966 he did a global tour. He had a ton of shows in Europe. One of my favorite albums of his actually is the bootleg series. It's actually called Royal Albert Hall, but it was in Manchester Free Trade Hall, I believe, the actual recording.
Yeah.
And it was him. And I think at that time he was doing half the set acoustic, half electric. And when he'd go electric, the crowd would be booing and like, you know, jeering him and everything. And he'd be on the mic booing back at them. And he'd be telling his crew, like, come on, play it loud. Like, you know, like really throw it in their faces. And in any case, all those performances that were in that documentary, I don't know like what happened to me, if I was super susceptible that day, whatever, but it just like hit me like a ton of bricks. And from that moment on, you know, Dylan was my favorite artist ever, you know, and I went down the Dylan rabbit hole and all the stuff. And, you know, I became like a Dylan file hardcore.
Yeah.
And to this,
Have you read the books?
well, I read Tarantula. Is that what you're,
No, I was
or,
thinking like Chronicles and
oh,
Anthony Scudetto.
no, is Chronicles like his autobiography sort of thing?
I don't know if it's an autobiography, but it's a biography.
Okay.
I think. Yeah.
I haven't read that one, but I've read a ton of stuff, and Tarantula was just kind of like this stream of consciousness thing he did back in 65 or 66. It makes no damn sense, but you know, it's one of his, you know, creative productions. So you kind of had to look into it. But anyways, yeah, you know, so that was it for me. And I was hooked after that. And I was reading your bio on your website before this, and interesting to hear that he was one of your influences. What about his style, work, music drew you in, you know, originally?
Well, I mean, it's the lyrics. Like what I like about Dylan is that so I'm with my lyric writing, I'm very like matter of fact. I sort of say it how it is. And I want to try and like write a song that's like a 3-hour film, but in 3 minutes, you know what I mean? Like a whole story of a character, and very like, you know, not leave that much room for interpretation, but be quite like clear about what I'm saying. But Dylan kind of writes in a way that it could mean anything, and people can bring their own interpretations to it, which I don't know, in some ways, I don't know if that's easier to do than be very like crystal clear about what you're writing, or if it's actually harder to do. But he kind of like taps into like a subconscious part of the mind where he's like using these images and these words that like conjure up, like it's almost dreamlike, you know?
Yeah.
And I really like that. But like you said, I just like the fact that he just didn't care. He just didn't care like what people thought. He was like, this is what I'm going to do. And you're either going to like it or you're not. And I'm just going to keep doing it until you like it. So I'm not going to change. You're going to have to like get on board,
yeah.
you know, with the electric stuff, which is really cool. Like, I don't think any artist today would get away with that, especially not a signed artist. Like the label, like, you crazy? You can't boo back at the crowd, or you can't, unless it was part of like some contrived marketing thing.
Right.
Like,
yeah.
But it seemed that was really organic, and it was just like kind of like the punk rock of folk that he was doing. you know.
Yeah, I mean, it certainly conveys a purity to the music, that the artist is not willing to compromise. Like, this is what I want to play at this time, and that's how I'm going to play it. And he's obviously become known for playing his songs differently from performance to performance, like just changing them up in weird ways. And I think it's just because he's so dedicated and committed to the music. He wants to explore the musical space all the time. And I don't know,
Yeah,
like pre 66. And it's funny you mentioned about like messages in songs and stuff, because of course a lot of people, when he became popular, because a lot of people from the protest movements thought that he was kind of like their voice in a sense. And he would always shun that. He would be like, look, I won't be at the rally. I won't be at the thing. I'm not. And I remember this, there was a press conference in 1965, I believe, in San Francisco, and that's become kind of a mini documentary because it's just the press asking Dylan questions, and
yeah,
he's smoking cigarettes and being aloof as he often is, and some young girl from Movie Magazine chimes up and says, "Do you think your songs have a subtle or obvious message?" And Dylan like fidgets around for a second. It's like what kind of message? And she's like, oh, I don't like, and they kind of go back and forth like that for a bit. And she was just like, look, I don't know, but your songs are supposed to have some kind of a message. And so everyone just laughs because she's like, she can't say what the message is. And she, clearly she's kind of just there for the magazine. But it was funny that, he was genuinely being like, what kind of message do you mean? Like, it's almost like he couldn't like it was so far removed from his mind that he was genuinely like, what do you mean message? It's so funny because you take songs like Masters of War, for example, or you take Times Are Changing, and of course they kind of jive with what's going on at the time, and you think there's a message. And even if he is kind of writing stream of consciousness, he's using the environment and the circumstance and what's happening in the world to inform that to some degree. So there's obviously a relation there, but it was interesting how he always shunned any other motivation or anything other than just the pure creative musical expression, it seemed. And he would allow that to flow through him seemingly regardless what the outcome might be. And at least for me, I mean, he's done a lot of cool stuff after 66, but 66, I feel like, was kind of the height of his explosion and popularity in the culture. And then, later that year, during the tour, like he was very maybe drugged up or just kind of out there, and there was seeming an unsustainable but a very unique element to his music and all that kind of stuff. And then he had the motorcycle accident, and he didn't perform publicly for several years, and on goes the legend of Bob Dylan. But yeah, I thought it was interesting that he was one of your influences as well.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, it's I've seen him a couple of times recently as well. Have you seen him recently in concert? Because he's
Yeah,
just on a constant world tour, right? Well,
the never ending tour, right? That's what it's called. I saw him in 2009 in Canada, and then I saw him in I want to say 2012 in Beijing.
oh, cool.
Um, and even then, I can't imagine what it's like now, because even then, well, Dylan was never known purely for his voice, right? And as an old man, I mean, you can't really hear anything that he's saying. It's not very articulate, and it's just grumbly. And
Yeah,
sometimes he's more animated on the guitar and the harmonica, and sometimes less. But it's like you go because you're in the presence of like one of the greats. I mean, you don't even really care what sound comes out. You're just like,
exactly.
you're there. And have you seen him recently?
Yeah, it's funny because both times I didn't actually pay for a ticket. The first time, a guy that took me is in like a Bob Dylan fan appreciation society or whatever. So he gets that really cheap ticket. So I went with him. And the front row, it was hilarious. The front row of the theater was giving him an ovation after every single song, which was crazy. And I think they just probably follow him around from gig to gig. But like, I didn't even realize he played Blowing in the Wind. It was that different. You know what I mean? It's
Oh
just
yeah,
crazy.
yeah. You couldn't recognize it, man.
Yeah, yeah. And I think he plays, each song differently every night, probably just to keep himself sane.
Yeah.
But and then I saw him in Hyde Park in London with Neil Diamond, and he did two songs that everyone sort of like recognized. So that was like a crowd pleaser night for Dylan. I feel because every other night he just does what he wants, and he'll turn
Yeah.
his back on the crowd and he won't talk between songs. I just think it's hilarious. But I also found it hilarious that did you see that he like won the Nobel Prize for literature and
Yeah.
he didn't even bother accepting it. Or like he won like something like $1 million check and he didn't even bother picking it up.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean,
Well,
he shunned everything basically his whole career, right? I mean, I
yeah.
guess he's done some you remember seeing him in the Live Aid? I think it was Live Aid or like when all the famous musicians were singing "We Are the World" or something, and he
Oh yeah,
participated in that.
and he looks
And he's
really
just there,
miserable. Yeah.
looking like he's looking around grimacing or whatever at people, and he's not really into it, and he's kind of like, what the fuck am I doing here, and who are all these people?
How
He's
did I
just
get roped into?
yeah, he's just a legendary character. And you got to, again, like back to that point, like I think people, when he first came out, there was such a sincerity to it, and those early performances had such a gravity because people were just kind of stunned by it. And he's proved,
Yeah.
I think, through the course of his career that like that was actually genuine, that he wasn't messing around, like he was just about the music. He considered himself a musician. He wanted to just hone and perform his craft. And here he is, like, what is he, 90 or in his 80s at least, right?
Sure. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
he's still all he does is tour and perform. It's crazy.
Yeah. It's pretty crazy.
Do you see yourself being like that, like
I feel
performing
knackered
for the
now.
rest of your
I feel
life?
knackered now. But I'm like, yeah, that'd be good going, but I have no idea.
What's it been? You mentioned, you opened up saying you kind of been a struggling musician. What's that experience like? And because we all have needs and we all have aspirations, and everyone's heard the kind of uh the archetypal, or everyone's heard about the struggling musician before, but what's it like actually just knowing that you want to commit to this and trying to commit to it, but being difficult to break through and get gigs and get listeners and the whole thing? What's the journey been like for you?
Yeah, it's weird because it's like we're in an age where there's an abundance of everything,
Mm,
but especially like media and entertainment. So I think like the hardest part is just sort of like cutting through and being heard in the first place by people for a start. Um, but then like it's just going back to grassroots way of doing things, just building up a fan base one gig at a time, which is how it's always been really. But it's kind of like there is no substitute for that grind, I don't think. I mean, you do see artists that just somehow seem to just take off really quickly, but then they're almost forgotten about just as quickly as they came up. And then on the other hand, it's like the artists that have struggled for years and years and years, when they do reach the peak, the audience that they've brought along the way and that have seen them struggle from like playing to a room of like 10, 15, 20 people to when they're playing a big theater somewhere, like that audience stays with them then and they have like longevity, it seems.
mm,
So I kind of like try and tell myself, I'm still starting off. I'm just releasing my first album. It's been a grind up to this point, and it's like hopefully the fans that I'm nurturing now will still be with me in another decade. Like that's that kind of thing. Like I was lucky enough to meet one of my heroes last time I was in the States. Sorry, the time before, I think it was 2017. I was in Nashville and I went out to Alabama. I went to Muscle Shoals to see a guy called John Paul White. Well, I didn't actually even know if he was going to be there. Basically, he was gigging in the UK, and after the show, I got talking to his guitarist because his guitar. Everyone like flocked to the merch stand to chat to John, and I saw his guitarist having a beer at the bar on his own. So I went and chatted to his guitarist, and said I was a huge fan. Like John Paul White had like influenced me massively and like got me into songwriting. And he was like, "Oh, cool, man." And I said, "Oh, I'm coming back to Nashville." And he was like, "Oh, well, if you come back, make the trip to Muscle Shoals. It's only like 2.5, 3 hours, and that in the States is nothing, right? It's like just
mhm.
ripping down the road." So he said, "Come and see us." And I was like, if you're genuine about that offer, I will actually make the trip. And he was like, yeah, sure, come down. So anyway, so I ended up going back to Nashville, and I sent him a message on Facebook or whatever and said, hey, like, is that offer still there? And he didn't reply. And I was like, I think, yeah, I had a hire car for a few days, and I was like, should I just go and just see what happens, or should I not bother? Is it going to be a wasted trip? And I thought, well, it'll be an adventure. I'm going to go see what happens. So I jumped in the car, drove to Muscle Shoals, and I knocked on the door of, they have like their own record label. So I knocked on the door, and I was greeted by two ladies, and I explained that I was over from the UK, and John's guitarist had invited me. So, well, he'd offered for me to come over if I was ever in the States. And they said, oh, that's incredible. They're coming back from a gig tonight. They'd love it that you've come, you've traveled. Can you come back tomorrow? I said, well, I've traveled like 3 hours, or whatever it was. I'll just probably try and find an Airbnb. And it turns out that like Muscle Shoals has such a history of, I was just completely ignorant to this at the time, but there's like Fame Studios and Jacksonville Highway Studios. And I've only since being there watched the Muscle Shoals documentary about, all the music that was made there. And I had no idea. So I was told about this, and I went around those recording studios and like did all the touristy thing there. And they actually got back that evening, and I got a message saying, hey, Joe, we heard you're in town. We're going for some Thai food. Do you want to join us? So I went along, and John wasn't there, but his manager and his guitarist were there. And basically I was just like, again, fangirling over John and saying, I'm a huge fan. And, I said this program, Nashville, is what really got me into country as well. And there's a particular song on the show. And they said, what song? And I said, it's called No One Will Ever Love You. And they said, oh, John wrote that song. And I didn't know that he'd written that song. I thought that was just a song on the TV show that they'd just been put on there. They're like, no, John wrote that. So I was like, this is crazy. And they were like, oh, come over to his house and you can tell him and meet him. So I was like, okay. So anyway, they took me over to the studio just to show me around. And he lived next door, and he saw the light on, thought it was getting robbed or something. Went round. I was like, what the hell's going on? They're like, oh, Joe's here from the UK. And anyway, we got introduced, and I was telling him that I was just starting off, doing music. And I was like, I already feel like it's so tough and I'm really struggling. And he said, I remember he just said, take it from me, as a guy that took until he was 40 years old to make it, he said, you've got time. It's okay. Don't freak out. Like, just keep going, keep doing what you're doing. And that like gave me a lot of like peace in a way, because just to hear that from him, because he's like won Grammys and stuff, and he's written for TV shows, he's toured the world, he like supported Adele on her world tour. Like, he was a part of a duo called the Civil Wars. I don't know if you've ever heard of the Civil Wars, but they were just about to like blow up and be massive, and they ended up splitting, sadly. But so it was reassuring to sort of hear from one of your heroes that it does take a long time, and you just got to persist. So that was quite reassuring. But no, I mean, I've just been gigging away. Obviously, the past few years with COVID, it's really just been like a sledgehammer, and it's just knocked me for six, because you've got all this work lined up, and then just in a flash it just disappears. And being self-employed, it's not like you've got any furlough or anything to fall back on. So it's hard. It was hard building that back up and getting back into it. But I don't know. It's kind of like you just got to keep going, just keep on keeping on, really.
How do you, and maybe John gave you some advice on this, but I put myself in your position, let's say, or in anyone's position, and surely at a certain point, because we're all impatient, right? We all want things to happen sooner than they often happen. And so that impatience probably causes many of us to say, well, am I doing something wrong? Could I be doing something better? Should I be doing something differently that would expedite this process that I feel like I'm on, or this journey that I feel like I'm on? And so like, what I mean by that is, what's your like compass for, and we were just discussing Dylan, right? He's kind of a great example, because now he was popular early, so it's a bit of a not a perfect example, but he never let what the audience wanted from him to dictate the music that he made. You know, he was his own compass basically. So how does an artist, you know, I don't know if tightrope is the right analogy, but how do they, you know, tour and gig and make music, and to what degree do they integrate the feedback from the audience, and to what degree do they not do that because they don't want to presume that that's the way, you know, forward, when and leaving their own, let's say, creative impulses, you know, to not guide them, or less a part of that decision making. Do you know what I mean? So how do you navigate that, is I guess is a question.
Yeah, as cliche as it sounds, I think you have got to kind of like stay true to what you want to do. You can't, like, I don't think you can write music that you just think people want to listen to. It's because it's not going to be genuine. Like, you've got to write something that means something to you and that you'd want to listen to. You've got to be kind of selfish about it in a way. And then I feel like you've got to find people that like that. You know, you've got to sort of accept that your music's not going to be for everyone, and just focus your efforts on the people that are going to like what you do. Like anything, I guess.
Sure.
But yeah, definitely just say, like, sort of, don't go chasing what's in vogue, or what the trend is, or anything like that. And it's kind of like, maybe don't use the past as like a blueprint, because things have changed so much. Like back in Dylan's day, like the be all and end all was the record deal, and that was it. Like, and like from what I've seen on documentaries and from what I've read, he like, no one wanted to touch him because he sounded so weird, and he was like a weird guy, and he just sounded awful, his horrible voice. And it's like he was singing all these crazy weird songs, and then someone covered, I think it was Peter, Paul and Mary, like covered Blowing in the Wind. And then that was it. And then everyone wanted Dylan just overnight. So it kind of shows how fickle the industry has sort of always been, in a way, that you just need like one lucky break, and then it can just like change everything. But I guess these days it's like, now with the internet, and hopefully with value for value, you know, if that keeps growing, it could be a case of, you know, you could be your own label, and you could make a pretty good career out of just doing everything yourself, and not needing to sign a deal, in a way, which is like what I eventually hope will happen. Like, you know, I hope value for value and where everything's going will lead to a day where, you know, because I'm doing everything myself with this tour and this album, you know, I produced it all myself. Well, I say I've produced it, someone else has mixed and mastered it and stuff, but the whole concept and all the writing and the arrangements and everything, I've sort of done myself. And then I've pretty much booked all the tour myself and promoted it myself. So, and like done the branding and everything. So in a way, I've kind of been my own label in that respect. So it's like, you know, I might as well, now I've got the skill set to do that. I just need to kind of like build that up and just make it bigger next time. But yeah, I think like there's the tools now.
Totally.
The artists have the opportunity to do that. So
yeah, I mean, I guess in the past, the labels distribution was huge, right? You had to get the physical discs and CDs and stuff out to all the retail locations. And then promotion was pretty big too, you know, paying for ads or installations in places and that kind of stuff. And now, I mean, distribution is nothing. It's like, which app are you using is basically it. You can get people to use different apps easily enough.
yeah.
And then promotion, and promotion is still involved, but I would say it's certainly different than it used to be, you know, like, and obviously there's still a place, you know, the legacy media and music industry is still alive, and, you know, probably will be for some time, but certainly there's a million examples of people using the social media and digital tools at their disposal to be their own promoters. And as you say, I mean, if you get one viral clip or something like that, just to bring, you know, to bring So a million people could be, you could be brought to their attention, you know, just in an afternoon because something went viral. And then that, you know, 10,000 of those people go down and pursue more and listen more. And, you know, it's a totally different, it changes overnight basically. And that can happen now. And that's what's so interesting about it. And, you know, now that we have value for value capability, I mean, it's even more compelling because you put those two things together and the listener can compensate you directly. No middleman, no commissions, or almost no commissions, like 1% or whatever the platform has. And that's the way it should be, you know. What do you, I get, maybe I want to talk a little bit about your album, but let's talk a little value for value first. How did you, you know, come across Bitcoin and value for value, and what were your first impressions when you were confronted with the notion that, you know, you provide these things, you know, your music, your hard work for free, and just leave it up to the generosity in people's hearts to compensate you for them?
Well, it wasn't that big a leap because, like, in a way, the music's already free if you're on Spotify or YouTube. Like, you don't see anything, you know. Even if you're a pretty big artist, you're not seeing really much at all.
How much would a Spotify compensate like a huge artist, like a
So they
John
claim,
Legend or something?
yeah, they claim that it's $1 for every 250 streams. So that works out at 0.04, I think, pence per play, 0.05 pence or whatever. And whether that's the case, like, I know of people that have had a few million streams and they've still never seen anything. So
Never seen anything?
not really, no. So it's, yeah, it's kind of crazy. And then it's like, well, you know, Spotify have, you know, all these costs and these overheads, and they've got like these, you know, big offices in London and stuff. And, you know, the money's going somewhere, but it's definitely not really finding its way to the artists. It's kind of funny because it's like the platform itself wouldn't have any value if it wasn't for the music on there to begin with.
But I guess it does, and this is the basic premise, or one of them, of value for value. It's like the whole world is having to come to grips that more and more of the things that we engage with or engage in are digital. And that means, as you say on your website, there's a zero marginal cost of production, and that means there's basically no scarcity. You know, and people try to ring fence digital assets, but someone can always circumvent them and share them and, you know, copy them and pass them around. And it's like, you know, all industries are coming to grips with like what that means. And so it's almost like, you know, I think embracing value for value is kind of embracing the tides of change, because if you're just trying to continue to ring fence digital content and get people to pay for it, you're fighting the tide basically. And
you're fighting a losing battle.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, I get why you're incentivized to do it for a time, because you know, a lot of those platforms are still making good money, but it certainly seems like it's inevitable that will be entirely circumvented. And then it's like, well, now what? And I think the early value for value pioneers are saying, well, the now what is, if the digital content is infinite, then much as you might not like it, and much as it may be a huge departure from how things worked in the material or physical world, we might be in a circumstance where the only thing you can do is try to provide as much value as possible, and then make it easy for your listeners or viewers or whatever type of content you have to compensate you in return for that value if they feel like it. And, you know, that's super foreign to a lot of people, like, because most people would just say, well, if it's free, why would I ever do that? But I do think developing a culture of reciprocity will probably develop more as we move into this space. And if early Bitcoiners and Bitcoin adoption is any indication, like, it certainly seems like there's an element of that. Now, maybe it's a little bit more exuberant right now because it's so novel and everyone just wants to send zaps around and throw sats around because it's fun. But I do think that a culture of reciprocity, of value for value, will be an element of that. And I see it emerging I see that being a constituent element of why this will work in the future. And, you know, a lot of people say, well, that's never going to work, but I don't know. I think it has legs. And from my, it feels good too. You know, like it feels good to listen to music, read an article that you valued, and there's no paywall. There's nothing like that. No one's forcing you to do anything. They're just at the bottom. They're saying, do you want to give value back? And most of the time I'm like, yeah, I do. Here's 25 cents. Here's a buck. Here's
Absolutely.
$5, whatever.
So it seems like from the artist side, there is no downside at the moment, because it's like, it's just one more platform you've got to put your music on. You already put it on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, etc., Tidal, whatever. So it's only like one or two more to add it to, which isn't, you know, that big a deal. The only difference is you actually might make some money. And then from the audience, the listener side, it just seems like until the network effect is there, there's kind of like no real reason for the audience to move across, because like I do feel like people do want to give to the artist, but if all their music is in Spotify and it's just easy and it's in the one app, they're not going to like go to somewhere else just to listen to Joe Martin and then come back to Spotify if Joe Martin's already in Spotify with all the other artists. Now, that being said, it's like the way I'm going to kind of approach it with my current fan base and listeners, because the thing is, like, I'm only sort of doing this on Twitter at the moment, and to people that kind of get what I'm talking about, because like my regular listeners just don't, I don't think they know what I'm talking about really when I say value for value, or, you know, stream sats or whatever. They don't know. But I think like I get people coming up to me at shows quite frequently now, and I still do well for CDs, like, which is great. I'm in a genre that people still buy CDs, a demographic as well of of listeners that still have CD players and have money to actually buy a CD. So, which is great. But a lot of people are coming up to me and saying, like, I really want to buy a CD, but I don't own a CD player. But I want to be able to support you, you know. And for that person, like, value for value is ideal. So it's like, you know, if I asked a crowd at a gig and said, like, look, if there was a way to support me where you could send money directly to me instead of sending it to Spotify with your subscription, but you could listen to my songs, or you could just pay me one off and then listen for free indefinitely, like, you know, would you rather do that than pay Spotify? And people will be like, well, yeah, because we want to support the artist and not a huge corporation, sort of thing. So they'd be willing to do that, but the technology needs to get there. It just needs to be super seamless. The onboarding needs to get there, which is it's not quite there yet. And then the network effects of the platform. Like, if there's the same amount of music on like Wavelake or maybe Fountain as there is on Spotify one day, then it might make sense for people to jump over. But I think it's just going to be a case of artists encouraging their fans. Hey, go over to this platform, listen to me on there. You can send me value directly on there, peer to peer, and that supports what I do. And then maybe you can go back to Spotify and listen as much as you want on there, but at least with the knowledge that you have supported me something, you know, give me something.
Yeah, no, I agree.
Yeah. CDs aren't going to be around forever. They're already, you know, getting phased out. So it's like, it's great to have physical merch, and it's a real big help sometimes when you're doing a gig and like maybe the fee's not amazing, but you know you're going to make it up on selling CDs and t-shirts and stuff. But as soon as CDs just disappear, I mean, it might end up a situation where if value for value keeps growing, that becomes the bulk of your sort of recorded side of your income coming in. And like CDs are just like a nice novelty thing, like that people don't even use. You know what I mean?
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I mean, I agree that it's tough to overcome the network effect. And, you know, unless you really want to be a supporter, you know, people have their go-to platform and they probably consume a lot of their music on that. And if it's not value enabled, then, you know, maybe they don't become a supporter. But I know you're on Nostr. Have you kind of allowed yourself to think about how that might change the game? And, you know, because the way I see that developing is you're going to have less of this kind of moats around different clients on a Nostrized internet, if we want to say. And so that would seem to maybe overcome that particular problem, because people might go from client to client, or all clients might be value enabled. And as And the real pull of something like that is the freedom, right? That's the selling point of something like Nostr. Not just that you can say what you want and not be censored, not be deplatformed, but also the freedom to move between clients and take your followers with you. And so I think that will be a very compelling, over the course of time, reason for people to migrate to clients on Nostr rather than apps on the normal internet. And
Yeah,
in such a scenario, then you have, well, the network effect is working in your favor. More and more people are coming on. More and more people are capable of sending value back. And so then, presumably that would be an ideal scenario for you, I guess.
absolutely. Yeah, I've still not got my head around Nostr. Is it like Nostr is going to turn every platform into an intranet in a way? Because like unless that platform then plugs into Nostr, it's not going to be like, will Twitter become a Nostr client sort of thing?
Well,
People think about that. Like,
I think it is kind of like, in my understanding, I'm not super technical, but my understanding, it is kind of like an alternative internet, even though it obviously uses, elements of the existing one. But I think it's just, a freer, censorship resistant, value enabled internet. I don't think there's anything, you could integrate lightning payments and zaps into Twitter as well, right? But the real thing here is that you control, your identity, and you control, your followers are associated with your private key, and not with, your account that you created on Twitter or YouTube or what have you. And when I think about that, I just think, wow, think about, so again, you have that primary incentive that is freedom. And I know, many people in the world today probably don't value that, but I think over the last 2 years, a lot of people have come to value that because they've seen just how much censorship and misinformation and deplatforming and collusion and all this stuff that's going on. The value proposition of like being in a space where it's like, look, you can say what you want. You'll never be deplatformed. You can't lose your followers. How do you feel about that? And I think more and more people are going to say, wow, I feel great about that. And then you layer on top of that the incentives created, or how compelling it is I think there'll be a ton of competition for clients of various kinds, whether it's social media or whatever other applications on Nostr. And because there's the moat around them, because you're not locked in, basically, you can go from one to the other if you prefer the features or the details of the application or what it allows you to do. And there's no detrimental effect, right? You don't lose out. You're just basically upgrading from client to client. I think there's going to be a tremendous amount of competition, and it's really going to be able to hone in. It's going to be able to determine what features people actually want. And that will just accelerate the degree to which there's an incentive to migrate over to Nostr versus staying on your legacy apps on the normal internet. And so who knows how long it'll take, and if it will scale and work in the long term. It seems to have a lot of legs, and
yeah, absolutely.
I'm optimistic about it.
I'm loving being on there. I mean, there was I put up like a little like short video of my latest single that I just brought out, and it was like a 30-second clip or something. I put it on Nostagram, and someone sent me like $1 worth of sats, and I was like, that would have taken 250 streams on Spotify, supposedly. And this isn't for the actual song. This is like for a preview of the song.
Yeah.
Someone's just sent me $1, and it's just like, man, that's crazy. Like, and I think I put up a post saying like, does this show how broken our current streaming platforms are? Or does it show like how amazing the potential is of open networks like Nostr? So it's super exciting.
Probably both, right?
Probably both, yeah. I've been messing around with Nostr Marketplace, and I had I put some albums up for sale and some T-shirts recently, and I've had like 3 orders for my albums. And someone tagged Ben Ark, Ellen Bitts, Ben, into the post, and he was like, "You do know this is in beta and it's super buggy and everything. Like, you're being really reckless." So I was like, I don't care. I'm happy to try. I'm happy to try it, see if it blows up.
Yeah.
So no, it's just moving at a crazy fast pace, right? It's like really exciting to see where it'll go. And I'm not technical enough to know like what can and can't be done, but it's like I don't know if can a media player, can like a streaming thing be plugged into Nostr, or can you host like, can relays, will they be able to host like audio files and MP3s and serve those to people for sats, and they'll take a cut if they're hosting your songs on your behalf and then forward the sats onto you. I don't know, like,
Yeah,
it'd be cool to see
I
that kind of.
think I think that's the promise, and that's what people are thinking about it. But even in the sense, even in these social media clients that have been kind of the first to gain traction on Nostr, there's now a much greater incentive to produce good content. So you see, whether it's just a text tweet, whether it's a video someone made, whether it's a song someone's posting, you post that out and send it to the world, and not only does it get renoted, whatever the term is on Nostr for retweet, but it gets sent around, so there's exposure to it because people like it. But now you routinely see tweets, whatever they might be, a creator put out a good Nostrich image or something silly, and they'll be zapped like 10 to 100,000 sats, if not more. And again, think about how many people are on those platforms right now, like really on them, not like signed up and officially are like part of the count, but like actively engaging there. We're talking like single digit thousands, I would say.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so when that scales up to 100,000, a million, 10 million, then I think there's a tremendous there'll be a tremendous incentive and tremendous reward, and there'll be business models based on how easy it is to monetize digital content, be rewarded for digital content on those platforms.
Yeah, it produces like better signal as well for everything.
Yeah, 100%.
Better, high signal for like, educational content, and also just like entertainment content, entertaining content. But no, I think this is what I'm thinking with value for value. If I as an artist could eventually build up, say, like 5,000 diehard fans, which isn't like out the realms of possibility, to do. Those 5,000 fans, if they're on a platform like Nostr where they can instantly zap you however much value, each time you release a song, if you release a song every month or whatever, and those 5,000 people are zapping you like $1, a song, for instance, that's like good money, that's like good living. And definitely supplemented with the live stuff as well. It brings back that middle ground that's been taken away by like the streaming platforms at the moment, that the value isn't flowing to the creators. It's kind of like, pre-internet. I think when the internet came along, I mean, obviously I'm too young to know this, but like people were buying CDs in the 90s for like £20, right? Back in the 90s, and that's when £20 was worth a lot more than it is now. So as soon as Napster came along or whatever, and you could get it for free, people probably lost their minds. Like, oh my God, I've been paying £20 for a CD, and like now I can listen to as much as I want. I don't have to pay for it. And it just went like, completely the other way. And then, Napster got shut down, and then LimeWire came along, and that kind of faded away. And then like Spotify and YouTube have kind of taken that void, that filled that void, where it's like they say, oh, well, we'll pass on a bit of money to the artist, but like it's probably not what they should be getting, or what they were getting before. But at least it's not pirated or being streamed for like literally nothing. And we're going to bombard people with adverts, and people are paying with their attention. And like every social platform has worked on that model, and I think that model is kind of coming to an end. Interestingly, as value for value is taking off, so I think those two things are going to cross over. But yeah, I mean, it's kind of like, I think people, when the network effect takes off and people are following an artist that they love, they will want to give to them and support them if they're producing good content.
Yeah.
Like, I don't think there's a question about that. Like, even, I mean, maybe it's because, I'm early to this relatively, and like people that are watching what I'm doing on Nostr and Bitcoin Twitter and stuff are kind of like, you know, being overly generous. But like, for instance, I released a song a couple of days ago, and I've already made like $30 on it from people doing sats, and it's like that would have taken like 8,000 streams or something on Spotify, and it's happened in 2 days, and it's not much, but it's like when you think about it in context, put it into perspective of what you've got otherwise, it's kind of mind blowing, really. So no, I think it's just it's a time thing. It's you know, sorry.
Well, I was just gonna say, I think you nailed a piece of it earlier too, in that the less friction, like friction is a huge aspect of it. So, why do people, you sign up for Spotify, you give them your credit card, and you accept whatever the monthly fee is, annual fee, and you don't have to worry about it again. Because like you can still get all the music on the torrent sites and all that kind of stuff, more or less. It's just a hassle, So these platforms just figured out, like, they found the balance between the, like, what people are willing to pay to not have to go through the hassle. And so I think if value for value is to take off, and I expect this will happen, the friction has to be greatly reduced to the point where, like, however it gets done, but if I want to listen to, let's say one of your songs, it's literally like a button, two presses of a button to give value back, at the end of it, let's say. And figuring out how to do that with minimal friction will be important, but I think it can be done. And when it is done, then the only other component is, will people be willing to give? And again, this is pure speculation, but what I felt in my own experience and observing others is that, you'll have a distribution, right? So you'll have a bunch of people, like, let's say for easy numbers, 80% that listen for free, 15% that give you, 10 cents, a penny, something. And then 5% that give you $1, $2, $3, $5, the big tips, basically. And I think that can work. And I think part of the reason is because there's something that feels good about giving value back. We're not used to it because we've been, we conditioned by this highly transactional model where, like, someone sets a price, you pay it and you get it. And that's it. But again, in this more digitized world that we're moving into, in this more value enabled world, I think people will start to consider, like, how it feels to not have to give back. So you get to choose. And then you're confronted with the choice, like, should I give back? What's the right thing to do here? And I think a lot of people will start to chew on that, and they'll be like, well, I enjoyed it, I got value out of it, why shouldn't I send some back? And from my perspective, it feels good. Again, like, it might just be 10 cents, but, like, to know that I'm able to do something that's going to send value directly back to the person that provided me with the value, with no middleman, no, very minimal friction, it feels great. It's kind of like maybe it's attached to the feeling of even spending sats. Like, when I was in El Salvador a little while back, and it was the first time I really spent sats, and I think the first thing I bought was a burrito. And there's just something about it that felt good. It felt good to relinquish something that I coveted so much for something that I deemed of value. And the exchange feels more pure. It feels more right in some weird sense. And so I think the same sort of dynamics will play out in the value for value and, like, digital only world, and possibly in the physical meat space world in the future. And I just think more and more people will start to confront that question of, should I give back? And a certain portion will answer in the affirmative. And at a certain scale, well, I think people like yourself and many other creators get supported by that, because if this thing just continues to grow and grow and grow, then the pool of people that are willing to do that is growing. And then the cream rises to the top, like anything, right? The best creators, the best content creators, the best musicians, writers, what have you, they get rewarded, they get sent the most. And I mean, you'll always have that, right? It's always going to be a distribution, a Pareto distribution, if you like, of the top performers and the top income earners. But I think that's where we'll see things go. And I think you'll benefit tremendously from being a pioneer, basically, in doing this first.
I hope so. I mean, like you said, it's it kind of brings you closer to the person you transacted with, knowing it's peer to peer and there is no middleman. And you're also transacting in a currency that values your time and values the other person's time, what they're sacrificing or the work they put into whatever they're giving you in exchange for the sats. So that's important. And I like the fact that Adam Curry, who kind of coined the value for value thing, he says that it's not a tip. Don't call it a tip, because like the word tip just in people's minds already creates this idea of something very small, but it could be any amount of value. Someone could, like for one of my songs, someone sent me $10, like the equivalent of like $10, which was crazy for like one song. But it's like you said, it's whatever the individual values it at. And when you throw it open to people like that and say, give whatever you feel, you're not putting a price on it. Like the person is putting the price on it, what they think it's worth. So it is an interesting new model, like new way of thinking about things.
How did you come across it? Like, were you a Bitcoiner first and came to value for value, or did you hear about this value for value stuff and then dug into Bitcoin? How'd you?
Yeah, well, I was kind of like, I was in a bit like interested in Bitcoin, and I read Safe's book, Bitcoin Standard, and that just kind of like blew the doors open, got me going down the Austrian economic rabbit hole, and really got into that. But I was kind of like waiting on the sidelines, and then Lightning was getting, more and more developed and more and more like easier to use. And then I think it was Kevin Rook that I first heard it from. He was talking a lot about it, and like all the podcasters seem to be having all the fun on Fountain. And I was just like, I wonder if, why couldn't a musician just release a song on this instead of a podcast, or call the song a podcast episode or whatever, and just, so like that's the first thing I did. As a bit of a workaround until Wavelake came on the scene a bit later on. But yeah, that it was Bitcoin first, and then and then value for value. But the way I want to kind of like talk to people about it that aren't in the Bitcoin world, for instance, that kind of don't really understand it. I don't want to like approach it as I don't want to talk about Bitcoin too much, just because about the kind of economic implications, or it gets it's a lot of political implications, all that stuff.
In the weeds.
I don't really want to talk about that too much. I want to kind of approach it from the angle of just pure utility. Like this is just a better way to send value online and support creators, and have a better artist and fan relationship. Like that's the angle I want to kind of take with people. So when I go out on tour in a few weeks' time, with every album that I sell, well, I'm gonna ask whoever buys an album, I'm gonna say, do you like tech sort of stuff? Are you technically inclined? And if they say yes, I'll offer them a value for value card. And basically it's, LightSats, the platform LightSats, where you can just like top up little cards and redeem sats.
Maybe. Sounds somewhat familiar.
I'm gonna get a load of those printed up, and they just come with like a QR code on them. You can hand them out. You can put any amount on there. So I'm going to put like a pound's worth of sats on there, hand them out to people, and then they can scan that. It will walk them through the steps of like downloading a wallet, redeeming the sats. And then I'm going to go and ask them to go to Wavelake or Fountain or my website even, and like send those back, or send a few of those sats back. Just get them, going full circle there, and just seeing how the process works. With money that isn't theirs, they don't have to commit to anything. Like I'm gifting them like a small amount just to kind of like give them a taste of it to see what they think, and try and explain that this is how things might happen in the future when, CDs are phased out, sort of thing.
That's a great idea. Yeah, it'd be interesting to hear the feedback on how that goes.
It's either going to go really well, or people are just going to like throw them in the bin. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, you got to expect like 90% probably will do that, but 10 might set up an account and start sending some sats, and maybe you facilitate their own journey down the rabbit hole, which would be great. What's Wavelake like? I haven't played with it yet. I don't really know much about it, but I was speaking with a friend of mine here who's an accomplished jazz musician, and I was, talking about value for value and all that stuff. And but I don't really know, how does Wavelake work? Can you walk me through it?
It's super easy. Like it's easier than because with the podcast apps you have to set up like an RSS account and all that sort of stuff. But with Wavelake, it's just you set up an account with an email and a password, like anything, and you get given like your own, like the wallet is just in your account when you make an account with an email. So you just make an account and you can just start uploading MP3 files straight away. But whereas like I'm pretty sure whereas like on Fountain, if you upload to RSS, it goes on every podcasting app at once. I think with Wavelake, it just uploads to the Wavelake platform. But it's in its very early stages, so it's just a web player at the moment. Like I think they've got plans further down the road to make an app like for Android and Apple.
But
But
the idea is to use it as a place to consume music and send value back. Like they want to be a Spotify type thing.
pretty much. And at the moment, like they've just released a new feature where you don't actually, because before you had to create an account to send sats even. So if I was just like even a listener, I'd have to create a Wavelake account to send sats. But now they've made it so you can boost people just from like the Albi wallet or like a browser extension without having to actually sign up for an account, which is handy, which is really good. But I think like, it needs to mature a bit. Like I'm sure they'll start having like ways to make your own playlists and for like artists to get categorized by genre so people can find artists that they might want to listen to a lot easier. Because there's still not many artists on there at the moment. So it's really, really early days.
Right. But you create an account, upload your files, and people can send you sats if they listen to them on that platform.
Exactly. Yeah.
Cool.
So I mean, like, I'd encourage your friend to just like get on it because, like, it'll take him like 5 minutes to set up an account and upload the music, and then like sit back and like, if any sats come in, great.
Watch the sats stream
you
in.
can withdraw them to his own wallet. Absolutely, yeah. Like, it's kind of at the moment I've kind of encouraged other artists on Twitter that might be following me to kind of like look into it and jump on it, but in real life, I've not really been that pushy with it yet because I want to kind of like have a good run, like say like 12 months on the platform to then like look back and kind of just do an A/B comparison with like legacy streaming platforms and then like Wavelake and Fountain, and then like have some like solid numbers that I can like go to people with and be like, look, jump on this. Like, there's a little downside, and this is what you could, potentially make. So like have something a bit more like tangible for people to like actually reference. But yeah, I think the kind of concept is still a bit like alien to people. So
have you tried to explain it to people at your shows or anyone else that you interact with in the music business, like that this is something you're experimenting with, and like, do they get it? Is it interesting? Have you tried?
I feel like maybe I'm just rubbish at explaining it, but like the times I've tried, people kind of glaze over a bit. They're like, "Oh, I don't know what you're talking about. Like, this doesn't sound," and I'm like,
what's so hard about it?
Yeah, it's like interoperable microtransactions, that's permissionless. It's a big deal. I had an interview for something different. Well, just my tour and my album with a local reporter for a local newspaper, and we were talking about the streaming thing and like the struggles of artists with like streaming platforms and not making any money from music. And then I mentioned value for value, and I was like, right, because I've got him sat with me like in the room, and I can like he can ask me questions, and I can go back to him. Like, I explained value for value, and within like 15 minutes, he got it. It really clicked with him, and he was like, "This is super exciting." He was like, "We need to do a piece just focused on value for value," he's like, that can be a separate thing. We'll come back to that. But he seemed to be quite excited by it, and he seemed to get it when I explained it to him. But I think it's the kind of thing that you can't really explain that well in a tweet or two. It's kind of like, you know.
Yeah. I mean, like so often with orange pilling, you know, people don't get it until they do, and then it's the most obvious thing in the world, you know.
Yeah, and there's no going back, right?
Yeah. Well, that's just always the case with new innovations, I guess. All right, tell me about the new album. The first thing that comes to mind is and I'm completely a noob at all this music industry stuff, so this is probably a dumb question, but why a musician for 10 years and this is the first album? How does that work?
Okay, it's not quite that. I'd say it's more like 6 or 7 years, really, from like 2016. So what's that? Seven years. 2 years, COVID doesn't count.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
Trying to justify this in my own mind.
Yeah. No,
I have been putting out music up to now. Like I've released a couple of EPs, you know, singles. I released a live album, which I did last year, but this is the first studio album. So it's kind of like, I don't know, maybe it's just a bigger deal for me, but like for artists, like it's quite a big deal to release your first album because it's kind of like it's your sort of defining moment in a way. And I wanted it to be right. I didn't want to put out an album before it was ready or just for the sake of it. Like I wanted to wait until I had the right body of work that worked as an album. It's not like a concept, but it's not a concept album as such. Like the album theme like ties the songs together. But the songs span over like 6 years of writing. So like the oldest song on there is like 6 years old. And then the newest song is like a few months old and everything in between. So that's kind of why it's taken as long as it has. And then just like getting enough, like, big enough fan base. I've still not that many fans, but like just gigging and touring enough previously to kind of have people that will be ready to, want an album or buy an album and release it as well. So there's that side of it too.
What was the process like? Like how long does it take to record an album or your album?
So I've been thinking about it for like 18 months now. Like I said, the songs span from like 6 years worth of work. But 18 months it's been in the works, and I started recording it in like August last year. So from then till like a few months ago, it was finished and mastered and everything. So I'd say all the like prep and all the admin around it is kind of what takes the time. Actually, like going in there and recording it is like pretty short. That lasted like a few days.
Oh wow, that's it.
Crazy that all this like prep and all this work and so many years of writing songs it just happens and comes together in a few days. And then it took a few weeks for it to be mixed and mastered. But yeah, there's a lot of parts that go into it. There's like, the concept, the artwork, mixing, mastering, all that stuff, and getting them actually manufactured.
Right. What's the plan for the launch? You mentioned you're doing a tour, doing a few podcasts and stuff. What's how are you gonna bring as much attention to this as possible?
So I've kind of like I've been doing all the promo pretty much myself and just working with the venues I'm playing at to get the word out there. So it's kind of like I've been reaching out to like local papers and like radio, even though radio, it doesn't really have the same clout as it used to. And like a lot of the radio I've actually reached out to, they've come back and said, the ones that replied have sort of said, we're told what to play now. Like they have like a playlist that they've got to stick to. They're not allowed any new music in, which is crazy. Yeah, so that's another bottleneck you got to try and get through. But yeah, and then like just getting in touch with fans that have been to shows previously in the towns that I'm playing. But like, I feel like the shows I've played before, the venues and the towns I've played before are doing a lot better than the new places naturally, because like already a little bit of a fan base there that remember me from last time. Whereas trying to break new ground, it's tough. It's very
Has the
tough.
live like show environment come back fully from COVID, or is it like kind of still, or is there? I mean, a lot of bars and restaurants and stuff closed down during COVID. So, are there
Yeah,
fewer
absolutely.
live gigs and live places to play live
Yeah, there
at this
are.
point?
I feel like uh, audiences are a lot more reserved, and not only that, but like cost of living and everything. Like people are being a
Right.
lot more choosy with what they go and spend the money on, which is
Mm.
fair. So it's kind of like a double whammy there. And like my crowd is a little bit older as well, so they're a bit more cautious when it comes to that. So yeah, it's been tough. But I did like a little promo with like Bitcoiners for like uh, discount with tickets, off tickets if you pay in Bitcoin. Had a few sales with that, which was interesting. And I've got like a lot of like local Bitcoin meetups to share it and stuff like that, which has been just been good as well.
That's
So
great.
I've tried a few different angles. It's all been like grassroots, because when it comes to marketing, anything, but like in the music industry, it's kind of like your success is a lot of it's defined on how big your budget is, your marketing
Mm.
budget is.
Hmm.
And like, yeah, the money that labels throw into like a tour, it's unreal. Like no self-employed musician can live up to that. Like I did a little campaign, spent a few £100s on like a very targeted like campaign, and you can see all the stats. Like they break down like how many people open the email, how many people click through, and it's like the money doesn't get very far. It's kind of crazy. I feel like the best way is just like word of mouth, grassroots. You
Well,
know,
I mean, I don't know enough of the details to actually say this, but I'll say it anyways. I mean, I think Bitcoiners love to support their own, right?
yeah,
And you're obviously, or it seems like you're one of the first musicians to run with this value for value model and streaming sats and this kind of stuff. And I don't know what this translates into how you can engage or provide value more to that demographic, let's say. But there's got to be more things you can do, because I think that's the group of people that's hungry to support people that are doing good things in an aligned way and using these technologies of freedom and fairness and value transfer and stuff like that. And so, I think that's at a minimum a fairly captive audience right now, because there's so few people on there that, like, if you're doing something at all different as you are in being a musician, then you're already kind of like standing out from the crowd. And I think there'd be a pretty strong willingness to support you and see you do
yeah.
well and
I
promote
mean,
your
everyone,
stuff, all that kind of stuff.
since I put out the first song in October, like I've just been blown away by how generous the whole sort of Bitcoin community has been, really.
Mm,
Um, and I think that's partly to do with like you said, people want to support each other, but it's like, if they see someone doing, if someone does well, then it kind of it comes back to them, because we're all working on the same goal. We all have the shared values.
yeah.
And it's like the appreciation, like, you know, it's like the appreciation of the purchasing power of what we're all holding if we're all succeeding. Kind of like it's a very virtuous cycle and all the incentives are aligned.
Hmm.
Whereas like I feel like in the fiat world, if you will, it's the complete opposite. Like when I reach out to people about the album or the tour promo and stuff like that, it's kind of like I feel like a lot of people just see you as like a nuisance. They don't want to reply to you because it's like, oh, what can you do for me? It's always like, what are you bringing to the table? Like, why should I even bother hearing you out? Whereas in the Bitcoin world, it seems the opposite way. You know, like I reached out to so many people when I released the first song and just said, hey, like, you don't know me, like I'm just getting into this, I've just got this song out, would you mind having a listen to it, and if you like it, maybe consider giving it a share. And like 9 times out of 10, people did. And I was like, that is crazy. Like that just doesn't happen. Like,
Yeah.
yeah. So
I totally agree. And that's why I say, I mean, again, I don't, creative juices aren't flowing at the moment, but surely there's got to be ways to, well, let's say broadly speaking, provide more value or engage or communicate to your fellow Bitcoiners more. And I imagine there's be no more fruitful approach than that. It seems.
yeah. Well, I definitely want to like get involved with more like Bitcoin events. I'm doing a local gig near me, a bar called Satoshi's Place, which is
Nice.
close by. That have booked me for a gig as part of like a event day that they're putting on. And then Avon Park, which is like near, it's in Somerset. They're having a festival in July. They've invited me down there to play. So that's gonna be interesting. I feel like I want to try something with that. Like I've said to them, I want to like cover my expenses and I'll play for tips, like value for value.
Mm.
So I'll play my set, and if people like a particular song, they can like send me sats during that song, or pay me like send a few sats at the end of the set that I play. And I could have like my lightning address up there or whatever,
Mm-hmm.
and just see what happens with that, because people are engaging, that your fans are engaging back at you in real time when you're in front of them on stage.
Yeah.
So it'll be interesting to see what that dynamic's like when that
Totally.
comes.
And as a pioneer, well, you'll be pioneering a lot of this stuff. So there'll probably be a lot of trial and error through the course of playing with it all. But I think the premise that you mentioned earlier of the audience or the listener really valuing that more close or one-to-one, disintermediated relationship with the artist is way underappreciated and undervalued today. And I think when the tools are developed for that relationship to be more frictionless and more variety in the ways that you can interact and the ways you can send value back and forth, I think there's going to be, well, there's going to be an explosion in that kind of stuff. And I think it'll be more apparent that how valuable that relationship is, that really, like, it's not abstracted anymore and there's not a million people in between. It's like, and even if you don't communicate verbally or text or anything, right? Like, just if you knew that someone sent you, some sats today because they listened to your thing, and this is kind of the allure, the value of boostograms and stuff, right? Like, someone could just say, "Hey, man, love this song. Here's 10,000 sats," and there's just, that's a different sort of dynamic that is completely foreign, to most people and to
Yeah,
anything in the digital world. And I think that the impact of that is going to be pretty big once more people taste it and once the tools get a little bit more sophisticated.
sure. It brings back like an economic signal back to the whole music industry in general, because like it's all based on like streams now, but streams kind of, they're not the best way to measure things, because like you could get put into a playlist that has a lot of listeners, but it could be like background music somewhere.
Mm.
People could be putting on these playlists in like shops and restaurants, and it's like background, and people aren't listening to the song and they're not engaging with the song. But you could have like hundreds of thousands of streams potentially, but that might not translate into people that are actually connecting with it. So if people are actually zapping you or sending you sats for the song, it kind of it reattaches it back to economic reality, or it like brings back that signal to the content again.
Mm.
And it kind of like gives you that feedback mechanism of like, is what I'm doing valuable? Is it good? Or am I kind of like, is it not good? Like, do I need to change things? So yeah, that's super interesting. But with the live stuff as well, it'd be cool to just like put on a free gig, put on a free show, to a load of Bitcoiners, be like, come along. Hopefully one day it won't just be everyone will be a Bitcoiner. They'll say, come along to the show for free. I'm going to play a set, and if you like what you're hearing as you go along, feel free to send some sats. And then people might start tipping you, and they might actually send you a big boost and say, can you can I request a song? I'm going to send you 50,000 sats, 100,000 sats. Can you play this song for me and
Right.
dedicate it to me or whatever? You know what I mean? So you could have
Totally,
that.
totally.
Um,
And also, this is kind of funny, but I think there's truth to it. It's like you mix some alcohol in there. I mean, everyone gets looser with their money when there's alcohol involved. So you might be
absolutely.
sitting at the bar, you're 5 beers deep and you play a really great song. And I might just open up the app and be like, here's 30 fucking bucks, fuck it, and that'll probably be a meaningful part of it, especially for the live stuff, as you're mentioning. I mean, I already do that sometimes if I, had a few beers and I'm sitting down on the couch, I'm on Nostr or something and just zapping people around or buying people drinks on a Friday night or something. It's just, yeah, I don't know. It's fun. There's something fun about it, and I think
Yeah,
that'll be a big element.
You could have something worked out with the barman to keep serving people cheap drinks, and if it's working, you'll give them some of that back.
Yeah. Yeah. One of my last questions for you, but what would you say is the the development or the technology that you would most like to see develop to enable something that you've been having issues with, or it's been a friction point, or how would you like to see this value for value tech develop next?
So I think for me, it would be the onboarding of the listener side
Mm,
of things, because like there's this whole weird gray area of like you know them having to acquire sats to then send,
mm,
and like how do they do that? There's like KYC rules, and like no one's going to want to like give up their driver's license and passport to buy £10 worth of sats to send you like a few pounds worth. You know what I
mm,
mean?
mm-hmm,
So like, but I don't know if that's not a technical problem. That's more of like a regulatory issue. Um, but like maybe I keep waiting for like something like Strike to come out over here, where it's just super easy. People can download an app from the App Store, and they don't even, it's like they've got their fiat balance in there. They don't even have to know that they're using Lightning or Bitcoin, but it just works and it sends instantly, and they can just start, top that up with 50 pounds or £100 and just start, you know, sending sats to people, um, and they can just see their fiat balance in there. I think that would be like a good first step for people.
mm,
Um, but at the moment, like this is why I'm doing the value for value pack and gifting people sats to get started with. Because if I said at a show, someone's like, "Oh, how do I get on this Wavelake or Fountain, and how do I support you?" I'd be like, "Well, you got to go. You got to go to an exchange.
all right.
You have to give up your, all your personal details, like you're setting up a bank account, and you've got to wire some money to it. Then you've got to download a wallet. You've got to send the funds off the exchange to your wallet. Then you've got to get it onto Lightning, and then you've
That's
got
a
to.
lot of steps.
They're just going to be like, no, I'm not doing that. You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
I'll
So
throw a like $1 in your bucket. That's way easier.
exactly. So I think what might just happen is like when landline phones just on the back end just turn to uh, voice over IP, and
Hmm.
like people that were probably like, oh, I'm never going to use the internet, you know, I'm just going to stick with my landline phone and that's all I need. And then it was like a few years later, the landlines were all using the internet at the back end, and the person didn't even realize that they were using voice over IP. It might be the same with their like Venmo account or whatever that just plugs into Lightning, like Cash
Hmm.
App's done, right? In the States, like it might just be a case that everything just gets plugged into Lightning, and people don't have to migrate from the app that they're using, but they can just start sending you value because all of a sudden, like microtransactions just suddenly get turned on one day in PayPal or whatever they use. But that's just because those systems plugged into Lightning, that they didn't have to get onto Lightning.
Hmm.
Maybe.
And then over the course of time, the older version, the legacy tech just becomes obsolete, and people don't even really realize where the switch actually happened.
Exactly. Yeah. It'd just be
Mm,
like, I feel like a good way to look at it is just like what happened with the internet
mm,
probably will happen again. Similar experience, maybe.
yeah.
Yeah.
I totally agree. Well, man, this has been great. I was looking forward to this because, you know, I'm obviously a big Bitcoin proponent, and I think it's essential that, and this has been the case, you know, since the beginning, that a circular economy, a parallel economy, if you will, develops around Bitcoin, right? People have to be using it, earning it, spending it, and of course, saving it for this to become a system that people can sustain themselves on and which can outcompete the legacy system that so many of us are so critical of. And I love seeing the emergence of different content creators, artists, entrepreneurs, all different types, really starting to plug into this system. And, you know, even though there's a lot of legwork and it's messy because you're a pioneer and you're the first to do it, and all the maybe the headaches that come with that, persisting and doing that, and hopefully both immediately and as we move into the future, availing of the benefits of that. And you know, so I think you're on the right course, and it's great to see you doing what you're doing. Do you want to shill the album and tour and website destinations and all that stuff before we shut it down?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. If there's anyone from the UK listening, I'm going out on a 14-day tour up the country, starting on the 13th of April, and it finishes up on the 30th of April. So if you want to go, the best place to go to find tickets to that is just my website, which is joemartinmusic.com/tour. All the socials, it's just Joe Martin Music. I'm on Nostr as well now, so come and say hi on there. And like on Fountain and Wavelake, it's just Joe Martin Music. I've got a couple of singles out that are going to be on the album already, but the album actually drops on the 1st of May. So I'm actually going out on tour before the album is officially out online, because I've got a load of CDs that I want to try and flog before people can listen to it for free. But keep an eye out for the actual album coming out online. So that's the 1st of May, but it will be out on all the value for value platforms a little earlier than that. So,
And name of the album?
it's called Empty Passenger Seat.
Nice. Nice. And that's one of the songs on it too, right?
Yeah, that's the single I just released. That's the title track of the album. Yeah.
That's a great song, man. I was jamming out to it earlier.
Thanks, John. Cheers.
Well, look, man, best of luck with the tour and with the album and with everything else you're doing. And maybe we do this again in 6 to 12 months and see where things are at, and have an update then.
Have a recap for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. All right,
Thanks,
bro. Take care.
you too, dude. Thank you.
See ya.